Hey, everyone, and welcome to the Score Sheet Podcast. We're having conversations with experts and enthusiasts who share our insights, stories, experience in adjudication. We're discussing best practices, unpacking processes, empowering new judges, band directors, parents, students, teachers, and veteran adjudicators of music in concert, jazz, solo ensemble, marching band, and pageantry art. I'm Ron Stary, your host. I'm a 35-year veteran educator and band director, raised and educated in Minnesota, now residing in South Dakota. And with that, in a spirit of humility, we're inspired to learn, lead, empower. Especially excited today with our guest, Dr. Ward Miller. Welcome, Ward.
Thanks so much for having me, Ron. It's great to be with you.
Yeah, super excited. Ward, we've gone back about 7 years. You've been a judge of our groups up here. You've been active in the upper Midwest. You're out of Minneapolis. You've been judging solo ensembles, large group, jazz ensemble. So, a lot to cover today. Can you give us some background, more information, your experiences in judging? Give the listeners your bio.
Well, sure. But before I do that, I just want to say I'm very excited that you are doing this podcast. I think that there are a lot of judges in waiting out there or who are judging now who want to improve the messaging and the product that they're getting to bands when they're there. And I think this can be a great resource for them. But I think also sometimes when we're band directors and we're receiving that feedback, sometimes it can be a little bit of a mystery to it because there is judge speak, no matter how clear we have to try to be. And so the ability for us to maybe help people to understand and better react to the feedback and numbers they're seeing from judges, I think is a really powerful thing. So thank you so much for putting this together. Yes, I've had the pleasure of judging for the better part of 2 decades now. I started with judging marching band, and I still do that to this day in several states, as you mentioned, but also, as you mentioned, solo and ensemble, large group, festival, jazz band, etc. Um, I think that I really started to think in a more meta way about judging when I was serving as the brass captain head of the Blue Stars Drum and Bugle Corps for 5 years. Because as you know, that's a very long circuit. You're on the road getting feedback for several months. And of course, you're getting critique after every show up until the very end of the season. And understanding how to translate what those judges were saying and what the numbers were telling you, along with what they were saying critique. And that was the first time I really thought about caption judging that way. I grew up in a time and a place in Alabama where a lot of judging was not caption based. It was, Olympic style judging. You got a 1, 2, and 3. It was overall judging. If there was any specialization, it was in, say, the visual ensemble, percussion, or drum makers. There wasn't a caption for this, et cetera. It was a different time. And so I had to learn and develop those skills. And that's when I really started to think about, okay, if I'm going to judge, how do I make sure that I'm as clear as possible, both with what I'm saying and also with the numbers that I'm giving? Because I think the numbers do tell an important story. It's not just about getting those ensembles in the right order, which of course that is rank is our number one goal. But making sure that the spread between their content and achievement and the spread between the ensemble tells the tale of what you're seeing and hearing. So I'm glad we get to talk about these things. This is something I'm really passionate about and I work hard at.
How have you seen yourself develop these skills in the 20 years from what has been that moment where, okay, I'm moving in the right direction?
Well, I think that all of us who judge, we have all been recipient of less than clear or frustrating recordings and or score sheets that we're hearing one thing and we're being given a number that doesn't match that. Or we in our minds think our ensemble is doing this. Why is that not being credited? And so a lot of my growth as the judge has been understanding, okay, this judge was trying to tell me this and I didn't understand at the time and I should have been better at that. I need to make sure I am as clear as possible to make sure that people who hear my tapes and see the numbers can understand it. But also, I don't want to give a tape like this judge gave me years ago, and I'm quite certain somewhere there's somebody saying that about one of my early takes. It's just amazing we grow and improve. But I think that in the end, it comes down to when you think about every ensemble as a group of kids who worked at least 10 hours that week in the hot sun or the cold or the rain or all three, you want to make sure that you are crediting as much as possible what they do and that your numbers tell a tale that is real, that it shows the improvement that they made over the week, that it tells them how close they are to catching an ensemble above them or below, and what portions of their performance specifically are either enabling them to do that or preventing them. And then finally, to be as specific as possible. I think that is my mantra in all my dealings as a clinician and a judge, trying to be very specific to exactly what you heard that was a blemish or saw that was a blemish or was unclear. Why was it? And how could they fix it? Now, there are limitations. Sometimes you can't talk that long on a tape. And also sometimes, we're not supposed to give them all the answers if it's a circuit, right? But I think that the more specific you can be about what is going wrong and how to fix it and how that could improve the product, the more appreciative those students and staff are going to be, because everybody's trying hard. Nobody's not trying. Everybody wants to get better. Everybody wants to succeed. Everybody wants to win. I mean, if we didn't want to win, we wouldn't compete. And it's a lot of work out there. And so I just really think that that's my guiding principle, is to make sure you respect the students and the staff enough to give them something that recognizes what they're doing and gives them next step. Because we all know you finish that contest on a Saturday or a Sunday in some cases, and here comes band for the next week. What are we going to do this week? How do we spend the limited time we have to get better? And I think it's important that we guide them as much as possible.
Yeah, your feedback has always been clear, not only as a judge, but as a clinician from our interactions. So I appreciate that. So what's missing? How can we improve the overall adjudication community?
Well, I don't know if it's about us reaching out and improving the entire adjudication community. I think, as always, it's a two-way street where, number one, are the folks who are being judged, the receiving comment, the staff. We can play the tape for the student, but we all know that in the end, it's on the staff to really make the plan for the next steps with that ensemble and get them where they need to be. I think that, number one, on our side of things, like I said, specificity. So if you're judging music ensemble, for example, and you want to talk to them about whether they are having missed releases or something like that, you want to be as specific as possible on that. Are they going over the releases? Is the entire ensemble? Is it the low brass? Are they tapering away and not reaching the sustain at full volume at the release? Is there a blemish on the sound where someone is making a change in tone color at the very end? If so, then what do you think is happening? Is it because they're opening their mouth too wide? Is it because they're using their tongue to stop there? I think the more specificity you can give, the better. Now, of course, we want to avoid oversampling and not just saying those things over and over again. Typically, when I've said it about 2 or 3 times in the show, I say, I'm not going to say that again. Just know that is an endemic issue that I think you guys need to address. Here's how I would do it. But also, I think it's important, and I think this is the function of your podcast as well, as I mentioned, is that for those staff members to educate themselves on what judges are saying. And, no matter how clear we need to be, in the end, there is a certain level of judge speak that we have to use because we want to make sure that we don't give too much energy to one thing. We don't want to say, oh, you just need to play louder, because then we'll get absolutist. Everybody's just playing louder all the time. Sometimes we just want you to communicate more clearly, which, I used to joke when people say communicate, they just need to play louder. But it's not always just louder. Is it their tone is not clear? Is it that their response not clear enough when they attack because we've got the teeth closed when we first start? We want to diagnose as much as possible. At the same time, those folks who are listening also need to understand when we say things like, I'm not certain where to look here for your soloist. What we're saying is if we're judging general effect and we hear a soloist and it takes us 3, 5, 6 seconds to find where that's coming from, that's taking us out of the story, that's taking us out of the moment. And it's important that we find a way to highlight that. And I think sometimes, and I get it, there's frustration on the part of those staff members. They're like, how could they not see them? Well, the truth is, most of us are getting a first read on a performance. Even in a circuit, you're often getting a first read very deep into the season as you move around and hear different groups. So it's important, I think, for those folks to understand that when we say those things, it's not just the nitpick we're making up. It's something like we need to be perfectly clear on a first read as much as possible. Will it comprehension improve by judges with multiple viewings? Of course. But the more they can get it the first time, the more clear your product is, the better. And I think finally, the thing that a lot of band directors and staff members hear sometimes when we say, I'm recognizing the demand here, is that they go, okay, if we're getting this, why isn't our content score good? If we as judges don't say, and you're achieving it, that's our way of saying, this is hard, and you're not doing it. And, a lot of times we speak that way, I think, because we know that the students are going to hear these, and we want to make sure that we're not just a blunt instrument hammering the kid. You know what I mean? But I think that sometimes we get caught up in our own book, and we're like, how come we're not getting credit for all the stuff we're doing? Like, we don't credit things that you try to do. We credit things that you achieve. And if you can't achieve this, then let's just say these 16th notes and 8th note. I think that's something that we all learn in all walks of life when it comes to music education. It's better to do something a half grade easier perfectly than it is to do a half grade harder okay, because you're just not going to get the credit for okay. Now, of course, there are limits. If you get out there and do whole note, half note, go for a walk, the content's not going to be there, and we're not going to credit it. But as a general rule, it's better for you to have something that you can achieve in a very sparklingly clear way to get credit for, be it field timing, harmony, balance, technique, you name it. We want the quality to be there. And I think a lot of times we get caught up. Of course we do. We've been designing a show as a staff since, March, April, May, and we've been putting in a dozen hours a week minimum on it. We're in love with the ideas on that page. But in the end, I think it's important for us to remember that the judges don't have your music. We don't have it in front of us. We don't know what you're trying to play. All we know is what we hear and see. We don't have your drill. We don't have your music. So, it's okay if you decide to water it down. If it means you're going to play it perfectly or you're going to mark it perfectly, then you're going to get the credit for it. And I think that's something that the other side of the table, the folks in the ensemble, really, really should listen to.
And you're talking about this relationship between the adjudicator and the staff, and this whole dynamic of, as a younger staff, or that thing that we learn through experience or wisdom of understanding what the criteria is. But this dynamic, you're kind of covering that whole aspect. Okay, those people on the other side of the table, are they really hearing what the judges are saying? How can we talk to them?
I think they do hear it. I think that they're just very close emotionally to the subject matter. And I've been as guilty as that as the next person. You're hot and tired. You've been working from 6 a.m. till 10 p.m. all summer at drum corps. And a judge on a Thursday night tells you that, they can't hear this clearly. And you're like, what do you mean you can't hear it clearly? You get frustrated. But I think more it's about the misunderstanding part. We say things like, I recognize the demand. They think that equals content. But when we don't follow it up with, hey, you're achieving this, and we have to be very explicit about that. If we don't follow it up with, you are achieving it, then you're not, and I think that's somewhere where the wires get crossed sometimes, but I do think that it really comes down to not being too close emotionally to that show. Take a step back and go, all right, if I was not a band person, had no training whatsoever, and I'm just a crowd member, and I'm watching this show, you tell me what I'm supposed to look at, right? You tell me what you can hear, what you can see. And I think that we as musicians, we get the score that we've memorized and the drill we've memorized in our brain, and we see parts of that aren't there. We hear parts that aren't there yet because it's not being communicated clearly enough. because we have such a tight emotional attachment to it, and we've studied it. The judges don't have that advantage. We only have what we can see and hear in front of her, and if it's not clear, then that's a problem. So I think that finding a way to step back and maybe get some trusted, maybe non-musician feedback on the show can really help you to see what those judges are saying sometimes. Like they said something about pacing. Okay, if pacing is an issue, perhaps we show it to someone and we ask them, would you get bored and stop listening and watch? They'll tell you right here. And that's when it's time to make a change, both to the actual content and to the execution.
And that misunderstanding, how have you trained yourself or worked on your own skills to be clearer, to communicate as you're in the heat of a show, you're evaluating, you're doing commentary? What skills have you worked on to prove that?
Well, number one, I'm always taking notes, written notes on my iPad, and I only take notes on the things that are really, really strong or really, really a standout weak that needs to be addressed. That way, whether we have critique or not, if there's a follow-up of some kind, I can go, this is what really worked. Here's where it didn't, and here's how I think you should fix it. So giving them the highlights and the low light, because I think we're all looking for that. What do we do next week? How do we make sure that the plates that are spinning in the right direction keep spinning that way? That's your highlight. Where are the things that are pulling us back? Well, that's what we need to attack this week and the next. That's the first thing, taking good notes. Second of all, making sure to use very specific language. I think that if there's anything I learned during my time in drum corps, is when you go to critique, it's not about arguing with the judge or anything like that. It's simply saying, okay, you said we need this area to improve, but you weren't specific. What do you mean by that? And if you can't get them to be specific, well, then that's where you question that feedback. But if they're saying, well, the harmony isn't clear enough, okay, what do you mean? Is that balance? Is that intonation? Is it that we need to revoice it? You know, that sort of thing. So being as very clear and specific as possible. And then finally, and this is the hard part, taking all those notes and saying those things while not talking over the rest of the show. And that's something that's really hard to do. But you know, you'll hear something that happens. It's usually a big, you know, feature or a big full ensemble moment or some sort of effect. And you want to talk about what worked or what didn't and to address it. But more things are happening after that. There's a soloist, there's a transition or something. And I think it's important for you to go, I'm really sorry I'm talking over this. What I'm hearing is good right here. To make sure they don't think when they listen to their tape, well, they just missed this entire cool thing because they were talking about what happened 15 seconds ago. So that's what I try to do. Am I always successful? I doubt it. I'm sure someone's like, you tried to, but you didn't do it with my tape. But I try really hard to do that. And then finally, especially when I judge general effect, which is what I spend a lot of my time doing. I never expected myself to be the general effect. I always thought of myself as a music ensemble person, because I'm a music focused person, not as much visual. But making sure that you use as wide a lens as possible when you're talking about general effect. And what I mean by that is what parts of this connect audibly and visually? Am I seeing and hearing the same thing? What layers of information you're trying to communicate? You're doing a show about X. What are the different layers and little things that you've inserted? The kid did this little fun thing here. Because we all know that the show really develops throughout a season with the kid coming up with cool ideas, or staff members coming up with cool ideas. There's these little small inserts, but they help you layer information that supports your theme, your idea, your character, etc. throughout the show. I think it's important you try to catch those things and credit them. And if you're not catching anything, that's when you say, hey, I think we need more of the following in order to support your idea. Like, I think we need some motion here to match what I'm hearing. This is a lot of music, but we're quite static. Here's what I suggest. Or, wow, I really love that in this moment, you guys are playing a ballad. It's about love, and I'm watching the guard, and they are portraying like love on their faces. There's actual character. So crediting it as well as recognizing where there are deficits in specific ways when you're talking about music general effect, I think is very important.
When do we cross that line from being the judge to being a clinician? Do you watch that? Is it a danger? Some people say it is. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that you always want to be when there are technical aspects of the show, they're not being. And by technique, I don't just mean fast fingers and hands and flags and whatnot. I mean just the actual. Here's what's been written, and here's where the blemishes are. I think it's okay to be very specific with your feedback because then they're going to go, okay, our releases aren't good, and it's in the following ways, and this is how we address it. You need that. But when it comes to design of a show, when it comes to general effect, and like, I think you should do this, that, and other. I think you should be careful. If it's that there is a lot of emptiness in the show, I think it's number one, especially through the midpoint of a season, especially a circuit, to say, hey, I know that you probably have plans to fill this in because we're early days. You probably don't have everything, but I would suggest that we have some sort of simultaneous demand here to match what we're hearing. Rather than, I think you should do this with your head and do that. That I think that when you start to do that, number one, that's a lot of information. Number two, that assumes that they don't already have those ideas. They probably have thoughts. But number three, I think that you're accidentally, while you're trying to help, you're actually telling them, hey, I'm going to see you guys for 3 weeks. If you don't do the things I just said, I'm going to not credit it, or I'm going to take it off your score or something like that. So I think that you want to be as specific as possible on technique. And I think you want to talk in generalities when you're talking about design, because it's not our job to design. It's simply for us to say, especially, again, we tend to talk more about design when we're talking about general effect. I think it's our job to tell them where the effect is not happening because we have a lack of coordination of audio visual, et cetera, or because we are not looking where you want us to look. That we want to be more general about. Hey, I think you should buy these $75 LEDs from Amazon. Here's the link, and put them around your fluid. That's too specific. But hey, we need something that will draw our eye there. The bigger it'll draw our eyes, the better. It doesn't need to be subtle. That way, you're not prescribing specific like design changes to their show, if that makes sense.
Yeah, what you're saying, you thought yourself as a music ensemble judge, but you found yourself in this role of music or a technical area where it's music or visual. Be more specific. Look for the wider generalities. Am I hearing this correctly?
Yes, I think that when you're talking to an ensemble about its execution of what's written, where they fail to reach that, you can be super specific about that. Hey, you guys are trying to play me a bunch of 16th notes here. It's not coming through clearly. I suggest you do the following. Why don't we slow it down, play it all tongue? Why don't we group it in 4 sets of 4 16th note slurs so that we get more clarity? Let's close the air on the downbeat, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or this sounds like it's really at the bleeding edge. What we could do, let's consider maybe taking out a couple. Then that's something that they're trying to accomplish from a technique standpoint. But if it's instead like, I'm hearing this and you guys are doing this with your body, I wouldn't do that. I would do this. I think that there are ways to talk about those sort of artistic stories in a more general way, rather than prescribing things that they feel they have to do exactly what you said. Not to mention, if you get into the weeds too much of that, you just talked over another show. So I think you got to be careful when you're talking about artistic and interpretive prescription. But technique, I think we can be very specific, and people appreciate that.
Great. Let's talk about that. Not only as judges but on the other side of the table, staff, how we can improve our ability to get error detection. And I think that's a good segue to what you've been working on recently with your textbook.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's talk to band directors about building up these skills to hear what judges are saying. Does it go back to their training?
Well, I think that when judges are talking to you about what they're hearing that is not clear, be it blemishes on the sound, the technique, what they're seeing visually, etc., I think that we all need to strive to be technicians. If you think about the traditional drum corps, BOA ensemble structure of the ensemble, you've got caption heads and ensemble coordinators who have a vision. And when I say vision, I'm talking about in their mind's eye, what they see, and in their mind's ear, what they audiate, what they want to hear and see here. And they're communicating what the interpretation should be and what we want to hear and see. I think it's upon the technique, the tech staff, the technicians. And sometimes you're in a band that doesn't have technicians. You're the band director and you're the technician. I think it's on us to be as specific as possible. To be a tech means to really get close into the bells, get close to the feet, and then ask yourself, am I seeing and hearing exactly what I want to see and hear, or is there something where we fall short? And so when judges are saying things like, oh, we've got blemishes on the releases, what they are, I think sometimes it can be frustrating. I think they're just being nitpicky. I don't really try to come up with nitpick stuff. If a band's perfect, I'll be like, well, y'all are perfect. I'm going home. I haven't ever seen one of those. I've certainly never had one of those bands, but there's some that are real close. But what we're trying to do is get you what we're doing as judges, which is be specific as possible. Hey, your name, your left foot doesn't come up high enough right here. It needs to be 2 inches higher. I think that all the kids are trying. I think all the staff are trying. There's nothing more elective than marching band. No one has to do this. So it's not a question of somebody needs to be pumped up to try harder. Sometimes, yeah, motivation is important. But I think sometimes they just need the information on exactly how they're falling short of motivation. And that can be not fun to do. That aspect of being an educator is not fun, especially when you're dealing with ensembles where there's, 100 people plus, and your job is to tell everybody what they're doing wrong. And I think sometimes that in our effort to not be a bummer or not make kids feel bad, we sort of back off from it, especially younger teachers. They're afraid they're going to lose the ensemble. And yes, if you just spend all your time picking people apart, of course. But in the end, students want to do it right. If they're going to stand out there in the hot sun and put forth all that time and effort, they want to get as close to what the judges want as possible, because that means they might win. Everybody likes to win. And so I think that it's important that we be technicians in rehearsals and that we be technicians as judges, meaning we are specific to the note, to the person, to the measure, to everything as we possibly can be. I try to really work hard as a judge to say, okay, I'm doing music ensemble today, and we've got a mellophone on side 2 between the 45 and the 40, who is really letting the aperture on their embouchure spread, and it's causing a balance in a blend issue. It's not fun to pick on a student, but in the end, that student wants to do well as much as the next person, and the band wants to do well on the field, and helping that student is helping everybody. And so I would really encourage young educators to not be afraid to be specific. We're not belittling students. We're not being sarcastic. We're not making fun of them. We're simply saying, do you hear that sound you're making? Open the teeth wider, drop the jaw, focus. That's the sound. Don't let it go past that. And if you do it again, I'm going to keep on reminding you until you can hear that for yourself and feel what it's like to play with a good sound. That's the relentless, refining nature of a music education. What changes our brains in that positive way that music does, that having a music education does, and it's what leads to great performance outcome. To that end, you had mentioned the textbook that my co-author I just put out this past year. GIA publication picked up our developing music education in the instrumental music education, which basically my co-author, Dr. Catherine Foster, who is professor of music education at Virginia Tech, and who I've met while working with marching bands years ago. We had many discussions about, a lot of young directors struggle when they get out there on the podium and on the field, and a lot of them end up leaving a profession, which is a real bummer. We don't have enough people to begin with. We don't need to lose them. And the ones we have, we want their bands to be better, but also we want them to be actualized and validated on the podium and be happy in their position as well. I think we all feel happier as educators when we have control of our situation and of our destiny, and we feel like we're making a positive impact on the band. And a lot of times, because there's that negative feeling of telling the band when they're not doing things correctly, we shy away from it. When the truth is it's a win when we get those kids to improve and fix something with the way they're performing. And I think that the sooner young teachers develop those skills to be very specific, the better. Because let's be frank, the more specific you can be, the more you can walk down onto that field and stand 3 feet from that student and say, hey, did you hear you play B flat? It's B natural. Now that kid has got a win in a private space that maybe only people next to them heard. as opposed to being on the tower and we are just saying, good, do it again, in which case, why are we doing it again if it was good? Or, no, that's wrong. That's the wrong note. Who? Because there's 100 people out here and 99 of them said they play the right note. So I think that specificity, we see, especially when we're younger teachers, we feel like, I don't want to make this kid feel bad. But you're at the same time, you're ignoring the other 99 who didn't have that issue. So I think that developing the ability to hear through all of that sound to very specific things, or look through all of that image to very specific blemishes, and then communicate that in a main but clear and concise way when someone falls short of that, it's going to be a win for that student, and it's going to be a win for the ensemble as a whole. And it's a win for you as the educator, because you have, instead of do it again, do it again, do it again, and you've actually had positive impact. You're happier on the podium. And so we wrote this book and had it published through GIA. And just so you know how it worked, we actually surveyed dozens of educators across the country, men, women, different ethnicities, different rural, urban, richer, poor, you name it. And we simply asked the following: what are the errors most commonly made by young to intermediate performers in the areas of pitch, rhythm, articulation, dynamics? And then we actually wrote hundreds of musical examples that were professionally recorded, and they're recorded as written, but we wrote the errors in. So, hey, young performers tend to rush when they have descending 16th note. We actually wrote that in, and our professional recording musicians actually recorded the error inclusive examples as well. And it tells you not only what those common errors are as dictated by these many music educators through their practical experience, but also how do you hear it? How do you improve your hearing of that in the future? What are some techniques you can use to clear out the ensemble to hear just one second at a time? What are some lesson plans you can use to address that issue before you even start the piece of music? Okay, we're having trouble with rhythm. Well, let's play our concert A flat scale because the piece is in A flat on this rhythm. Let's clap up, let's, et cetera, et cetera. So we just tried to address it in as many ways as possible so that people would have this skill developed, because all the research on error detection, there's been a lot of academic research on it, says that it is a separate skill from your own musicianship. It's not something that is related to how many ensembles you've been in or the quality of those ensembles. It's not related to how well you did in music theory. It is a completely separate skill. And I think that when we talk about that as band directors, we realize intuitively, yes, absolutely. We all know that ensemble ears are different than you playing for yourself. And so the book actually takes you through all of that, and each unit there are only errors in one error in 1 meter of at a time. So the entire first unit is just errors in rhythm. The second unit is only errors in pitch. So it's a very scaffolded program that, built up over time, so that by the time we get to the end, we've gone from hearing solos, duets, and quartets to here's the University of North Texas Wind Symphony playing an entire whole suite excerpt. Where are the errors from this recording? And it's, I'm very proud of it. And I'm proud that my co-author and I were able to put it together during the pandemic. But I think that those are skills that band directors need from the podium in their rehearsals. They need them on the field when they're teaching. Staff members need them. And they need to take that tack when they're addressing judge feedback in the coming week. If you're hearing the same thing from judges, we need to hear the individuals who are doing those things. We need to see the individuals who are not reaching those goals. And we need to give them a very specific, private help they need to get where they need to be, rather than addressing the entire ensemble. We need to help those individuals, because those students, not only they're going to be happier, their friends are going to be happier with them. They're going to be less frustrated. It's going to lead to better relationships. I think that something I tell kids all the time, bands, like, how to make friends in band, do your job, because every time you're the one who's not doing your job, somebody gets mad. And there's no way people pick friends based on who's doing their job in band. I'm like, absolutely they do. So I think that that's where error detection, as we as judges, need to be as specific as possible. but also directors need to take those skills, put them into rehearsal, and really take that tack with their ensemble.
Yeah, that whole idea of ensemble ears. It's a specific skill that's developed, and you've come up with this scaffolding way to address this. And I love the idea of the student can go in your textbook and hear the exact issue
Yes, all
and
the recordings
dissect
are
it.
posted online. There's no CD or anything like that. All the recording. In fact, you can go and listen. If you go to GIA's website now and look at the error detection resource, you can hear all the recordings, both error inclusive and error exclusive. The recordings, as I said, the full band was done by University of North Texas. Very honored to have that time. Although, as I was writing errors into the whole suite in E flat, I was like, I bet those folks are not going to be happy about playing wrong note. But actually, I heard they thought it was a laugh. And then all of these solos, duets, and quartets were done by professional musicians in a studio, recording sessions over time. So it's really quality. We felt it was important to have real instruments played by real people, so that it was the best tone quality possible. We wanted to make it where you could hear very specific errors. But no, I think that makes students and that makes band directors happier. I think everybody's happier when there's specific feedback. Nobody likes being told they're doing things wrong. If it's done in a kind and private manner as you can, and they're given exact corrective prescriptions on how to get there, it's a win for everybody. And I think that sometimes that younger teachers, they don't feel comfortable doing that, but I really do think that that's the key is giving that feedback to get those specific issues addressed, not just musically, but visually. One of my favorite things to do with visual is, why are we not really seeing the upper body carriage we want? Well, is it the entire ensemble? Or if it's an endemic issue, then we can go and work on it. But if it's just the individual, something I tell people all the time is cover up the bottom of your eyes and only look at the top of the students' heads. And the ones that you see left and right or up and down, that's where there's a muscular issue of not lifting up the spine, or with the feet, not using proper technique. And that's where you can go and help those students. You can pull them aside and give them a private lesson. And then you're solving something for the entire ensemble, and that student's going to feel more confident and more accomplished with what they're doing. So, again, I think that sometimes there's that old saying, somebody doesn't see the forest for the trees. But I think that in bands and ensembles, sometimes we do the opposite effect. We don't see the trees for the forest. We got to get this forest prettier. We got to limb up this forest to make it greener. Well, the forest will be prettier when that tree over there is pruned up and standing up straight. And I think that we as judges can help that by being as specific as possible.
Love it. Yeah, that's a great analogy you're bringing out there. And this whole idea that everybody's working hard is a great way to approach is judging, teaching.
Yeah, we all know that there are students who are not giving it their all sometimes. We know there are attitude issues. Those exist. But when you think about it, the vast majority of students, they just want to succeed. They're all there. They're all trying. I mean, if they're there, they're already trying. They just need, I think about John Wooden when he coached, and they asked him, what's the secret to your coaching? He said, he said, for players don't want to be motivated. That's like 10%. They want to be told when they're doing it right. And if they're doing it wrong, I want to tell them exactly, no, you need to do this with your foot. No, do it again. No, that's not. Okay, now that you're doing it right, let's do it 5 times in a row to make sure you know what that feels like. So I think that this is stuff that is universal to all teaching of all kinds. When we're trying to develop any kind of skill, it's about giving information on where they're succeeding and where they're falling short and how to get them there.
The communication.
Absolutely.
Is there any thoughts on nomenclature, vocabulary, the way that you talk?
Yeah. When we are dealing with any kind of judge sheet, if there is a rubric, I think it's always important. I know this is a very broad, simple statement, but to look at that rubric and make sure you use the descriptive words that are in that rubric, because those band directors, all they have is that sheet. They're preparing to that sheet. And if you don't use the words on there to justify the scores you're giving and to give them guidance on your corrective feedback, then they're going to be like, that's not on here. Well, how am I supposed to know that? So I think it's important, of course. Now like I think all judges know that's what you're supposed to do. But when you find yourself moving from circuit to circuit or from, different places that have different sheets, I think it's important to go and look at that sheet just to remind yourself of what the nomenclature is. And then second of all, not using blanket statements. I just think the band needs to stand up straighter. I think that's important, but what are you seeing as a judge that's indicating that? Are you seeing them move left and right? Well, that's more an issue with the feet. Or are you seeing them swing at the body and bounce up and down? That's something more to do with the center of the body core. Are you seeing it in the entire band? Or are you seeing it in only sections? Are you seeing it in, individual? Rather than using blanket statements. The more blanket you are, again, it gets back to specificity, the less they have to work with. I think we're all trying to justify the numbers and the rankings we get. But I think you got to be really careful. One of the frustrating things I heard from a judge one time when I received the tape was the harmony is just not complex enough. And, that doesn't really tell you anything. Number one, we've got the book that we have, right? Like we can revoice it, we can change some chords and whatnot. But does that mean that we are not communicating the harmony that's written? Does that mean you don't think what was written is complicated enough? What do you mean by complex harmony? Is it that we need more extensions in tertiary harmony? Does it mean we need more dissonance? Do we need to use tritone substitution, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? So anytime that there's a judge who gives kind of a cop-out answer like that, it's frustrating for him. So if you feel that from a design standpoint that the harmony is lacking, you'd better be really specific in why. Is it because of the way they're executing it? Or is it what's written? Well, if it's what's written, let's talk about what you would do instead. So I think that's important to make sure that we are, again, specific and don't use blanket statements that we can just sort of, well, as you can hear on this tape, I said these things, so that's why I can put you in set. You know what I mean? I think that we need to avoid that. We all want to justify our numbers, but if we're going to justify, especially high or low number, there better be even more specificity to those comments than there would be otherwise.
Without maybe a circuit or independent shows, without having critique, what do you suggest these band directors to understand what a judge is saying or they didn't quite get it?
I think there's absolutely no problem with emailing that judge and asking and say, hey, I just think you want to always avoid taking a combative or very, very pointed approach because you don't want to give them the wrong idea. But just saying, hey, thanks for the comments. I had some questions because I want to be able to address those things, but I know on a tape, not enough time to say everything you want to say. Here are the questions I have. I'm emailing them to you, or if you'd like me to call, well, you can call me if you're comfortable with it. Not all judges are comfortable with that, but for me, if we're not in a circuit, then there's nothing preventing us from talking afterwards, right? There's no conflict of interest there. There's not. Now, if somebody wants to, contact me and tell me that I'm the idiot, well, we're going to not have a phone conversation. That's never happened. That's never happened. That's not saying I'm a great judge. I'm saying that I don't think a lot of people want to do that. I think that people want more information. I think sometimes they feel that it would be inappropriate or somebody's not going to write back. Well, I mean, maybe they won't, but at least you tried. And I can just tell you when I'm judging, if it's not a circuit, I leave my email address on the sheet and I say, if you got any questions, email me and I'll fill you in on more what I mean. Or if you don't understand what I said, I'd like to be clear. So I whether the judge says that or not, I think the director should feel free if they're not on a circuit. Now, in a circuit, of course, if you're seeing these groups throughout the year, there's going to be some sort of, injunction on there being communication between judges and teachers and staff. And that's fine. That's appropriate.
Yeah.
But if it's not a circuit,
critiques there. Yeah.
Right.
Hopefully there's critiques in that kind of situation.
Yeah. But if you don't get a critique, then email them. I think it's totally fine. And it's easy to find anybody online now. You can find them on Facebook, whatever. And again, just make sure you take just a slightly soft step just to make sure that you don't put their hackles up and make them think that you're going to complain about your placement or something like that. Now, I will say this. When it comes to critique, a combative stance doesn't help, but keeping judges on their toes is 100% appropriate. That's why I, as a judge, always make written notes so that when we have that critique, if there's something that I address heavily, I can refer back to those notes. Because the truth is, if you as a judge, they say, well, you said this, and you go, and they say, well, what did you mean by that? And you can't explain it specifically, then you have erred as a judge. If you can't be specific about that feedback, it is your error. And what's going to happen is, let's say you're a band director, you go into that critique and you say, you said this, but what does that mean? And they can't answer it. I think it's appropriate to say, well, how are we supposed to fix that if you're not specific? Can you be more specific? And let them see that you're writing things down. And at the very least, that judge is going to go, well, I better be sure to credit that band for what they're doing next time I see them. Or I'd better give way better feedback. It puts that judge on their toes. I think it's also important that when the judge says, I really need you to fix this thing, that you as a staff member write that down. This judge on this date said we need to fix this thing. When are we going to see them again? If we address that and we actually do it and we achieve it, and then we see them 3 weeks from now, we go to critique and go, we achieved it, but you don't seem to be crediting it. And we had this discussion on this date and time. I think that helps to really make those judges be on their toes and be a little bit more aggressive in crediting your band. So there is a little bit of gamesmanship there when you're dealing with a weeks long circuit with critique afterwards, letting those judges know you're keeping notes too. When we were in our tour with the Blue Stars, we as the brass staff, we kept an entire sheet with which staff member saw which judge on which dates and what were the high points and low points that they mentioned and the numbers that they gave, so that if we were going to see that judge 2 weeks later, whoever saw that judge at that last critique, it would be the same person going to see them again. And they would have notes, okay, you said this, and we really worked on that. It doesn't seem to be getting credit. Does that guarantee you're going to jump up in the rankings? No, but it ensures that judge is going to be really careful to be specific and to credit you a little bit more than they would otherwise if they see that you're taking a very informed approach to those critiques.
Man, so much great information. Couple of questions going back. You mentioned 2 things that you write down when you're judging, and then a little bit about the tendency to oversample or to try to avoid oversampling. So let's go back to, what are the 2 things you try to write down where you're in the hot seat?
When I'm making my notes, if there are things that are just really, really going well, it was a great soloist, it was a moment that was great, et cetera, then I make sure to note that, to say, this thing you're doing, keep doing that. It's great. But also, if there's something that really stands out from a design and or execution standpoint, really holding them back from being successful, then I make sure to make those notes, because I think we all want to attack the hottest fires first when we are, working with our ensemble. And the question is, what do we do on Monday afternoon? Well, this. In fact, sometimes I'll say in critique, you should spend the entire week on this and only on this. I think also that being careful, again, like we said, not to prescribe design changes. You can say, hey, this seems really empty visually, and I'm hearing this, but I kind of want to see something like this. I wouldn't want to say anything beyond something like this, because as soon as you say, I think you should have this guard member leap up, and well, can they do that? Do we have the human capital to do that? I don't know. Well, I'm not the one in charge. I don't know those students. But 2, you're setting up this idea in that staff member's head that if you don't do it, the next time that you see that judge, you're not going to credit them. So I think that's really important to be careful.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it, to keep that limited, that little boundary right there.
Right. And then finally, I just think it's important that our scores tell the same story that our comments. I think we've all been the recipient of a happy tape. This is wonderful. Wow, it's amazing. Great. And then you're like completely canned at the bottom of the class or something like that. And that's just as frustrating as being told everything is wrong. There's nothing more. In fact, I think it's more frustrating to receive a tape where everything's great and they give you, all this sort of happy talk, and then they give you a score that doesn't reflect that at all. And when I say that the numbers need to reflect what you're being told, there's that. But also, I think the numbers tell a multitude of stories. When it comes to the spread between content and achievement, I think that is the number one thing that directors should look at. When a staff is trying to figure out where things are going wrong for them, they need to look at where is there a big gap between content and achievement. Because I think sometimes we talked about how we don't credit bands for what they try to do, only what they actually achieve. We, in our mind's eye, directors, we see this drill and we see this music in our mind's eye. We're like, there's so many notes. There's so much content. How could we not be getting credited for content? But we all know that derived content and derived achievement comes down to, well, your content may be way over here on the scale of 0 to 100, but if your achievement is only here, that's going to pull your content down. And so that gap between content and achievement is the number one signifier for me of where you need to do. So if you're seeing a problem like, oh, our content score is really good everywhere, why are we not winning? Well, where's the biggest gap? Did your guard have an 82 in content and a 77 in achievement? That's a 5-point gap. That is a signal that judge is giving you that your guard is not achieving your content. And probably, depending on where you're on the season, if you're early in the season, okay, we just need to work on it. But if you're at the midpoint of the season, it's time to start watering things down and making it easier. Because the moment that content and achievement get closer together, both numbers are going to move up. That content number is going to move up as well. Even if you make it easier, it's going to move up because you're achieving it. And I think that's a super important thing to look for. So I really work hard as a judge to make sure that I don't just do the, and no shade to anyone out there who's judging. If they just put 2 points between everybody in content and achievement, that's up to them. But I feel like that's a missed opportunity where if you want to go, wow, your content in music ensemble is a 92, but your execution is an 85. That's a big signal that you're giving those folks. The truth is the closer you can get it to 1, 2, 3 points max, the better it's going for that man. Everything beyond that starts to pull the content number down. So I think when staff are looking at those caption recaps and asking, okay, where is the stuff we need to look for here? Where is the secret? It lies in the spread between content and achievement in each caption. The bigger that spread, the more that area needs to be adjusted, both from a design and from an execution standpoint.
But these are ways to give staff members a better way to react to what they're getting feedback. And there's the narrative right there.
Right. That number is telling you, hey, you're not achieving what you wrote. Maybe you should think about writing something else. Or you're not doing your job. I think you guys can do this, but you're going to have to work harder to achieve it to get these numbers closer together. So that might be what's written might be a 95 in content, but if you're only achieving it at 88, well, then you're not going to get 95 in content and 80 in achievement. You're going to get, 90. It's going to pull you down. And so I think that when people look at the recaps, don't just look at what's the lowest caption. Look for the caption with the largest gap in content and achievement. That's where you need to find ways to shore up your performance. Now, if one is just titanically lower than everything, of course, if your total number in, visual execution is really, really low, of course, you need to work on physical carriage and all that kind of stuff. But also look for big gaps in content achievement, because that's telling you something. As a general rule, and this is the rule I use simply because it's one I see recreated throughout so many different competitions throughout the country that I feel like it can be pretty universal. If I'm using a 200-point scale and There's 100 points for repertoire or content and 100 points for performance or achievement. That's 200 points total. If I put, when that's all weighted to 20 points, if I put a total of 0.3 tenths between contents and achievement, what I'm saying is you're 3 weeks away from achieving this content. Well, there's an important signal there. How many weeks are left in this season? And how much rehearsal do we have left? If the answer is 3 weeks, then we probably need to water this. We need to do something a little easy. Is it just 2 weeks and we're in week 2? Okay, we're fine, you know. So I think that also is the rule for when you're ranking band. Okay, this group's a 92, this group's a 90. We're saying that you're all about 2 weeks from catching this band. All things being equal, everybody worked equally hard for the same amount of time. You've got 2 weeks to catch this band. That you're saying you're within reach of this band. As soon as you get past 3 into 4, you're saying like, I don't really see you catching this group unless something major happens with how you both execute and design the show. So I think when it comes to that, it's all about the spread. The spreads between content and achievement are most important. And then the spread between the ensemble is a signal as well.
And it's such a great way to think about neighborhoods and for judges. That's a great way to look at. Oh, we're kind of come up on the end of our visit here. So great to have you on today. You ready for a couple of Colbert style questions?
I am indeed.